Okay, so in order to actually implement this, I'm going to do two things. I have to set up routes for it, and I need to set up a controller to control it. I'm actually going to create a new controller. And the new controller is going to be called the follows controller, because we're going to treat follows like their own resource in some ways. I can just kind of copy a simple one like the users controller, put that into follows, and then just change the class name, follows controller. I often do that. The follows controller will only need two actions. We will need the create and we'll need the destroy. So what's going to happen is these actions are going to be responsible for doing two things: the create a follows relationship between a user and another user, and destroy a follows relationship between a user and another user. These actions are going to have something like, well, if you go into the follow gem, you can see here's how you do following: user.follow, user.unfollow. And in fact, I can show you how this works by opening up the Rails console so you get a sense of it. Now, I like to find, let's say I'm going to call this current user because in our app we end up having a current user. I like to find users by emails. So find by email, matan@onemonth.com. Yours will have a different name. And I'll also do a user equals user.find by email. And what did I have? I have a test user. Oh, I can find by username as well. So the username here is user. OK, so there's a user. Now I can take my current user and I can follow the new user, although we're running into an error. Undefined method follow. I know what this is. My current user can't follow anything because I forgot to add these lines, access followable and access follower, into my model. So let me go ahead and do that. So access followable and access follower. What this basically does is it enables those methods inside of on any object in here. So I'll actually have to restart this and open it up again. So let me go find these users again. There's my current user, there's my user, and I'm going to have my current user follow my user. OK, so what happened just now? Basically, I created a new entry in my database into the follows table. And if I do here, it actually shows what it is. Followable type is user. Interesting. Followable ID is 1. So basically what this is saying is the person being followed is user 1. And that was the person I followed. Follower type is user. Follower ID is 2. So that's user 2, which is the one doing the following. This fundamentally is called a polymorphic association. It creates two columns in the database, a something underscore type and something underscore ID. And this is what allows the thing that's being followed to be any kind of model. And it's kind of a special thing that you can do inside of Rails. So what I've just done is basically created a follow. I can check that out by doing follow.all, and I can see all these follows. And you can always destroy all of your follows by doing something like destroy all. And that actually allows you to delete all of your users or delete any kind of object inside your database from the command line. So I'm going to close out of this for now. And let me show you how I would set this up in here. I'm basically going to do something like, well, I would like to do current user.follow and then pass through a user. And I'd also like to be able to do a current user here, stop following user. Unfortunately, this isn't going to work because of how access follower is a little bit behind. You'll see in a second. But let me first talk about setting up the routes. So you go into the route. Now, this is where routing gets a little bit complicated. What I need is I need to set up a route that allows me to get the user's username out of it. So actually, the ideal would be if I could, have a route at users / whatever the username is, /follow, but instead of a GET request that you can get through a URL like this is going to be a POST request because it's creating something in our database. So if you actually go and read Rails routing, actually, remember how when we set this line resources for something, it creates 7 paths for us. 4 of them are get paths: the index, the new, the show, and the edit. Those are gets. Those are things you can get by just typing something into the browser. Get paths typically don't make any changes to your database. So that's one way of kind of remembering which one you should use. Whereas a post path is usually creates something, patch and put will update something, and delete will delete it. So if we're trying to create a follow relationship, it's probably you're going to want it to be a post, and if you're trying to delete something, it should be a delete verb. So how does that pertain to what we're doing? Well, this first route up here, I'm actually going to show you a different way of possibly doing this. Basically, when we created this, we did it to get to our user's show page, but this is basically just the typical show action of like right here of this 7 route combo. We just didn't want the other ones. An easier way to do this is resources users only show. So let me actually show you. I'll comment this line out for a second and do Rails routes. Show you what that first one gave us. It gave us this one, the get verb user prefix. So this is user underscore path. That's how we'd use it, and we'd pass through a username. It generates user's username, and it sends you to the user show action. So that's actually the same as this right here, which I'll show you. This only creates the show action right here, except you'll notice this has ID now, and we actually had replaced it with username before. So you can replace this with slug username, and that actually gives you the option for what you want to call that parameter. Or is it? Let's see if that works. No, it's not slug. It is I believe it's param. Let's try that. Otherwise, I'll look it up in a second. Yes, that is it. So param username, just like this. You can pause the video if you haven't caught up yet. Okay, now what we're essentially doing is we are adding a new action onto our users. So we already, we only set up a show one, but you can do what we're looking for is a member route. And if you search the routes file for member, you can add more RESTful actions, not just the 7 routes that you typically create by default. So, instead of create, read, update, and destroy, you can also add stuff like preview, or in our case, follow and unfollow of a specific user. So if I open up a block here, and inside here I'll do another one, member do. Now there's member routes, which are specific actions for individual items, like something you can do to one user, and then there's collection routes, which are things you can do to a group. So like searching among a group. But if you do member, it'll basically pass through the ID. I'll show you what I mean in a second. I want to do a post follow and a delete unfollow. And if you do that basically, and then you run your Rails routes again, what you'll see is that the route that got created goes like this: users/username/follow, users/username/unfollow. Now keep in mind the verbs are post and delete, so we can't just do a normal link. We'll actually have to specify the method there. And this is going to the users follow and the user's unfollow controller action by default, but we actually want to customize that. So this is going to the follows create and the follows destroy, which is the new controller that we've set up. So instead of going to the user's controller, it'll go to the follows controller. And the reason for that actually is I could add it into here, but I would call it follow and unfollow. But if you do it this way, it's create and destroy. And as much as possible, you want to use the basic CRUD actions. It actually simplifies your app. But that's, that gets pretty abstract and complicated, and it's not all that important that you really know like the best architecture, the best way to build large applications. Okay, so now what we have here is that if someone actually goes to this path properly, what we'll have available inside of here is a parameter with the name username, just like we had like param ID in tweets or this. And in fact, I can copy this first line over, and this will find the first user. Or it'll find the user that I'm trying to create a follow relationship with or destroy one. In this case, these are interesting actions because we're not going to be loading a view at the end of it. So actually, we can just use normal Ruby variables. We don't need to use that @ sign. The @ sign you put if you want to access it inside of a view. But and by default, unless you redirect at the end of an action, it will load a view with that name associated with it. But we don't have a follows folder inside of views, so we're actually just going to redirect them back to where they came from with a little notice. Now I believe the way that we have to set this up, because the follow thing is not going to work. And I had to experiment a little bit with this. So let's see if we can get this working right now. Follow.create followable. This is the thing that we want to follow. And then follower. This is my current user. So ideally, I would do it through the current user, but for some reason, I don't think that will work here. And then I think here, I can actually do a follow.find and then .destroy. Okay. And then the last thing I want to do is redirect to the user path for the user.username. And I'll give a notice, successfully followed user. And I'm actually going to do the same thing for the destroy. Okay, so I think I have my routes set up properly. The first is going to find the user, create a follow, and then redirect you back to that user's profile with the notice that you successfully follow them. The second is going to find the user, by the parameter, find that follow which should already exist and delete it, and then redirect you back. So they are almost exactly the same. And the last thing I will need to do is in my user show, create a follow link. So I'll do that with p class card text in here and close out that p. And I'm going to do a link to follow. And here's where I need to use this route that I had. So this is the follow user path. And I'm going to have to put in the user here. That's what's going to actually add it to the up here. I actually will need to do user.username because by default it puts in the user's ID. And I'm going to actually need to do the method of post. Oops, there we go. So let's see. So this error will usually happen if you've installed a gem, but you haven't actually restarted the server. If you know that this thing should work, it's because we installed the gem, but when you start the server, it sets up the app with kind of the snapshot of how things are when it first got started, and doesn't automatically know to include the gem. So if you get an error like that, you can just restart and it should be fine. So we have this follow link. Now, let's see what happens when I click follow. So it says successfully followed user. And of course, the follow link is still here because I haven't actually updated anything. If I go into the Rails console and I look at all the follows, there's my new follow between the user who did the following and the user who is being followed. Okay, so that works. Now, let me show you something else you can do. You can do an if statement, and I can do an if statement to basically check, is the user currently following that user? So I can say if current user dot following user. Current user, remember, is always available in every view. And then this @user I have because it's made accessible in the user's controller right here. So if I'm already following them, then I'm going to want to put some sort of like unfollow text here. Else, I create the follow link. And I'm just going to do this first just to make sure it's working properly. Now this is the part that might get a little finicky. Okay, so this actually worked for us. So what it's doing is it knows that I'm currently following the user. So I now need to put in an unfollow link. And I can do almost the exact same thing as I have here. Link to unfollow, except this is, of course, the unfollow user path, which is right there. And in this case, the method is actually delete. So let me refresh this page. Could not find follow with ID. Okay, so it looks like there's actually some sort of error here. Why can't you find follow with ID? Oh, this is not find, it's find by. Let's try that again. Find by default will only work for an ID, but here we're actually finding by fields. This is actually just like we were doing here with find by username, but I'm actually finding by two things, and that is possible to do. So actually, it looks like the follow and the unfollow functionality has actually been properly set up. And then the last thing I'm going to want to do is create a feed for myself, which is what I'll show you how to do in the next video. Oh, and the last thing we should definitely do before moving on is let's lock down the follows controller, so that if someone tries to click follow or unfollow and they're not logged in, it'll force them to log in. There we go. Okay, good. Now moving on to building a feed.